Hello and welcome to today's demo. I have a still life with my new coffee pot, my beautiful blue mocha, and some flowers against a backdrop of black fabric. And I got my easel set up here, and we have our paint already laid out. So for this painting, I'm going to be using a pretty basic palette. So I have titanium white here, cadmium yellow light, cadmium red, and I have King's blue, which is an optional color, cerulean blue, ultramarine, phthalo blue, and then I have raw umber, burnt umber, and raw sienna, and alizarin crimson. So we are all set up, and I'm gonna position my camera here to the side to give you a good angle. Make sure that you could see the painting as I'm working. So to get started, we want to make sure we have good lighting both on our subject, which is our still life or portrait or whatever it is that you're painting, as well as on your canvas. I'm going to be using these Da Vinci Black Sable brushes, which you can get in any art supply store. I also have some of my favorite supplies linked in my Amazon shop, so you can check that out. But really you're looking for, since we are painting pretty small, 5x7, looking for something that won't be too overwhelming to use. We may need a slightly bigger brush for the background area. Now for my 100-day challenge, which today is the first day, I decided to have a very subtle kind of boundary for my subject matter. So I am painting florals, botanicals, or they can be in a still life, or they could be outside, they could be in a garden or park, or they could be flowers I buy from the store, which is the case for today. And I just feel really drawn to flowers lately, so I thought I would give myself 100 days to explore them, and that is the inspiration behind that. You can paint whatever you want, of course, but I wanted to record this demo and get started on the challenge. So the first thing we're going to do is I am going to go ahead and grab a slightly different, I'm going to grab a little bit of a stiffer brush. So for the beginning of the painting, sometimes I like to use a flat brush, and this one is from Rosemary. They're pretty affordable, great quality brushes, so it's a good one. Now the other thing that we're going to need, and I have a little jar for that here, is we're going to need a medium. So I use either walnut oil or linseed oil. Today we're using walnut, which is a little bit slower drying, and it's very similar. I'm using Chelsea Classical Studio materials for both my brush cleaner and my medium. You can also store your brushes in a little plastic bag with some oil like linseed or walnut. You don't have to wash them every single time, especially in the winter, or if you have a freezer, you can easily preserve them by wiping them and then placing them tip down into the oil. And I have some paper towels, or you can grab a rag. So to get started, what we're going to do is I'm going to just take a look at my composition. I'm going to use my brush to kind of like draw in the air. So I'll show you how that would work. So I'm looking at my pot, and I'm literally just tracing it, and I'm trying to figure out what is the shape of this pot. And I'm an expressive painter, so I'm not so really worried about it being exactly precise, but I do like to have a general idea. And then we also want to do that for the flowers. We want to see what are some shapes in the negative space around the leaves, and of course the flowers themselves. And then you can go ahead and frame your composition with your hands. You can create a little square with your fingers like this, and then find the place where it feels good for you to paint, and just kind of mentally take a snapshot. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with that. I typically like to make an underpainting using red. This is cadmium red medium. And so the first thing I do is I just kind of work my way with the biggest shapes, kind of like a drawing, not worrying about making a mistake or getting it wrong or right, but rather just getting it down and just taking some time to kind of measure, making sure that I am leaving enough space for the flowers, and it looks like I have just enough. So at this stage of the painting, you'll notice that I'm not using a ton of paint. It's almost like a scratchy feeling when you're painting. And this is because we don't know yet. We're mapping it out. We don't know if we're happy with this composition or not. So we want to keep it somewhat loose and almost like erasable, because the purpose of this is, one, to establish where everything is going to be and create a map. And then we also are going to be sort of mapping out our value areas. So that values are light and dark and, midtones. So just taking your time here. And don't worry if things get a little wonky in the beginning. And we're going to correct everything as we get further in. So I'm just using red right now, but obviously just trying to sort of map out the background. And you can always take a little bit of thinner as well. And here's what we can do if things go wrong, which they will. Painting is all malleable, so you don't have to worry about getting it perfect, but you can take a little bit of your thinner. I'm using the brush cleaner here, which you don't want to paint with that, but you can certainly use it to remove undesirable areas. Just making sure you're getting rid of. Okay. And we're going to use a bigger brush to reestablish some of that. And now taking a look at the flower shapes here, and the vase that the flowers are in is dark blue, and it's practically invisible against the black fabric in the shadow there. So there is a very subtle highlight, which can be interesting. So when you hear me being quiet, that means I'm concentrating. What I'm doing now is going to make sense in a moment, but basically I want to see where the darkest shadows are and try to identify some of the negative shapes in between the flowers. All right, so subtly we kind of see where we're heading. So that's the underpainting. Now, if you want to take, you don't have to, but you can take a smaller brush. And so for example, this little lid, the handle, these details are definitely going to get lost, but if you're unsure when you start to block in some of the darkness, if you just want to protect some details, such as, the daisies up here, I'm just putting in some of the things that I might lose that I want to keep. There we go. Okay. Now, it's really easy to get carried away, so we kind of want to stop ourselves before we get too crazy. All right, so now we kind of have an idea, and this is all going to come together into much easier focus when we block in the darks. But the next thing we actually want to do is, and you could follow whatever path you choose, but this is how I do it. I learned this from Dennis Perrin. He was my mentor who passed away a few years ago. But so we want to establish the lightest lights, and not everything is going to be, so I actually mixed a little bit of cad yellow with titanium white, and this is just so it's not like a stark white. We're going to obviously paint this, so we're still working in that thin matter where we're just establishing the general vibe. We're not actually painting anything. Very, very light paint application. In the midsection of this teapot, correcting it a little bit here. But, okay, so we're looking just for the main shapes for now. Well, we're going to deal with, and here's a little highlight on this vase as well. And you're going to notice and course correct as you paint, so don't worry. Painting is malleable, especially oil paint. You can correct things. It's better if you can correct them in the early stages, but especially if you're just starting, don't worry about it too much. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is typically I mix my own black, which makes it richer, but for this background part, I'm going to take a little bit of ivory black, and I'm going to mix it with some phthalo blue, because we don't want stark black. Now, if you want to mix your own black, I highly recommend it. I don't know why, but today I just feel like doing this. I have seen my mentor do this before as well, so it's not a terrible substitute, but if you want to mix your own black, there's a variety of ways to do it. One of the most common ones is a mixture of alizarin crimson, phthalo green or viridian green, phthalo blue, or ultramarine blue. So you'll be able to create your own black in that way as well. But for today, I'm just going to use the black mixture with the blue. And part of it, the reason why I'm intuitively doing that is because the fabric of the velvet that I'm looking at looks a little bit like You know, honestly, it just looks kind of like a little bit chalky, so I'm gonna just listen to my gut. That's another thing too. I could be telling you whatever, another artist can be telling you something else. At the end of the day, you gotta do what you wanna do. And if it doesn't work, you can do something else later. Okay, so this is really important. So this part, we're gonna actually just block all the darkness, and because I'm using a black fabric in the back of my still life here, it's very, very easy to do. So you're gonna use almost poster-like flat paint applications, and if you accidentally touch another area, just refresh your brush by loading more paint onto it. And looking at your composition, looking at the main shapes, you are blocking in the darkest darks all around your subject, because the fabric is part of the subject too, but it has a bigger area, so and you can mix a little bit of oil, if you're using linseed or walnut oil, to your paint pile to make it flow smoother, just not too much, just a tiny bit to kind of like lubricate it. Now this part is gonna be a little bit tricky. I'm just painting, there is a vase here, but it's so subtle. I will preserve the highlight here, but you can barely see the vase, so I am gonna just paint and the foliage of these guys. We can barely see this, so we're gonna work our way into that at a later stage. Now, as you get closer to the foreground, the fabric is actually getting lighter because there's more light falling on it, so we can mix in a little bit of blue and respond to that as well. But even if you see slight variations, don't worry about them right now, especially if you're working in Prima, just block everything in. This will be more efficient for you. Okay, so now we blocked in the darkest darks, only a little bit left. Okay. So now we want to address the next value, which is kind of like a grayish dark fabric. So we're gonna I'm actually gonna take a little bit of yellow and mix it in with a little bit of blue. And then I'm gonna take some of this King's blue and a little bit more yellow here. And some of this white mixture, maybe some brown. Because it's not black, even though the fabric is black, we see that it is much lighter as we look at it, and even lighter than what I have painted so far, but we can always add a lighter value to it. And if you lost any dark areas that you want to keep, you can always bring them back. But for now, we're just going to keep moving on. Okay, now looking at our composition, noticing, maybe rinsing out our brush a little bit, noticing what is the next area that is dark. And from where I'm sitting, it looks like the side of the pot, it's like a rich blue. I'm gonna use a little bit of ultramarine and I might bring out my cobalt, but it looks like the ultramarine might work. So I'm gonna only add a tiny bit of white to this section, and we're just gonna block it in. Noticing if there's any other dark areas as this. The vase actually on the bottom here does have some of that. Now we're gonna go into the next lightest section of the coffee pot, and we're gonna mix a little bit more of the titanium white into our ultramarine. It's a rich, rich blue that this pot has. And we might have to switch to a slightly smaller brush situation in a moment, but I think the next part of the teapot is almost the same value, so we're just gonna, and there's gonna be a very elaborate pattern on this teapot as well. For now, I'm just going to block in what I see. Big shapes, not obsessing over the details. Okay, and there is the side of the coffee pot is in shadow, and it looks, if I squint my eyes, like a very dark gray, but I'm gonna add a little bit of blue to this gray mixture that we have from the tapestry, the fabric, because, and I'm gonna add a little bit of brown to it, maybe a little bit of purple. It's a dark, dark gray, maybe a little bit of white. Remember, you can always neutralize. Now for the area in the light, it's not quite in the light, but it's not quite fully in shadow, plus white values are going to be a lot brighter than the blue values. And so we're just kind of following along here, and we're going to get to the more details later. So here we're just adding a tiny bit of cad red and cad yellow to warm it up, because it's not quite white. And plus the light is shining on it, which has some yellow in it. So we can always bring the highlights back. And as you start to look at your composition, you're also going to notice other areas where maybe there's a similar shade of blue or value, right? Because we see in color, but really it's the value. And because the vase behind the pot is also blue, you could use some of the mixtures that you have to address it. Brilliant. Okay, now we have the basics mapped out. Actually, no, we don't. Let me grab a fresh paper towel. Make sure you're always, if you're working this way, make sure you're wiping your brush as often as you can, because the thing is that you're gonna get stuff all over it. And so we want to preserve the freshness of the paint. And this one is a little bit darker, so we can, right, and we'll use a smaller brush to tweak the details, but we're just gonna establish these areas here. And that part is in shadow, and actually I can take a smaller brush, and now we can kind of tackle this midsection of, there we go. All right, and then just always taking a look, making sure you're happy with it yourself. That's really what matters here. All right, moving on to, before we go into the details, it's more important to kind of address, I'm going to tweak something right here though. Before we go into like the patterns or anything like that, we're going to cover the rest of the canvas first. And this will ensure everything is working together in harmony rather than individual. So it's just easier to look at. Okay, next thing we're going to, and of course it's so easy to want to fudge with the details right now. That is tempting, but that is not what we're doing. One little thing, I promise, and then okay, there we go. I just want to get the values right. Okay, that's fine. Now I'm going to do the daisies. Now, when I look at the daisies, they are like a grayish blue, but they have a little bit more warmth in them. So I'm going to take a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of the ultramarine that's left over. We might need to squeeze some fresh ultramarine. And now I'm going to start with the darker daisy petals. So in the kind of background here, squinting my eyes so I'm not obsessing over the shapes, I'm going to find, there we go. And while we're here, I do need a little bit more of my, here, if I can find, there it is. So I need a little bit more of my cadmium yellow medium, which is like the warmer yellow, and mix a little bit of blue into it. And we also want to address the stems. So I'm mixing a little bit of phthalo blue with some of this cad yellow, and oops, that's way too green. You'll see that. So to neutralize it, you can mix a tiny bit of red or burnt sienna, especially in the shadow areas where, you know, it's not super bright or chromatic, right near like the shadow part, right near the actual petals, there's very subtle green. And as it gets closer to the light source, you may notice more color and more light. So you can kind of gently build up the values here. And if you want to go back with a little bit of the dark, you can always edit out anything extra that doesn't belong. Breathing, don't forget to breathe when you paint. Okay, great. So now we have established, and we can obviously work a little bit more into the petals and the leaves here. If you get overwhelmed by details, squint your eyes so you're just seeing the main shapes. This really helps me a lot. And then around a little bit more dark areas here, around the middle of the flower, there's going to be a little bit of a shadow, so and we'll get to those details soon as well. Okay, so the next thing, now we have kind of mapped everything out. There's a basic coat of paint on most areas. We definitely, we could pull more specific details out of the flowers and all of that good stuff. I'm going to load up a little bit more of the ultramarine blue, and I'm going to work on, first thing I'm going to work on is pulling a little bit more highlights from the fabric, and this will create a little bit more of a dimension. So to do this, I'm actually going to pull a little bit of my cad yellow and a little bit of burnt sienna into my dark mixture. I'm going to put a little bit more King's blue in here, a little bit of cadmium red. It's a very kind of warm brownish gray that I'm seeing. So squinting my eyes and noticing where we see some of it might be more subtle than others. Some of it might be a different reflection. And then if you did a little too much or you kind of lost some of the shapes too, in doing so, you can always load up your brush with the dark mixture, which was our black, and you could always go over. Sometimes less is more. Kind of liked the starkness of it actually, so I can bring some of that back. And maybe in the future, if I was to make a full-blown, painting that was maybe a larger size, or if I wanted to commit more time to a painting, I could really spend time glazing the fabric and the textile, the drapery. That's the word I was looking for. Alrighty, so now what we want to do is always wiping down your brush, maybe refreshing your rag or paper towel if needed. And I'm going to take the thinnest one I have. This is a number 2 in the Da Vinci. And I'm going to take some of this ultramarine. And I'm going to start with a little bit of white in the ultramarine, but mostly direct. Looks like a very concentrated ultramarine color. And I'm going to gently and carefully start to bring in some of more details into the coffee pot. There's a shadow here. And when you're ready, if you want to do a pattern, which is why I bought this coffee pot, or actually I asked for it, Santa Claus brought it for me. But I'm going to just do an impression of the pattern. I'm not going to worry exactly about the way that this pattern is, but I will do an impression of it. Painting, I'm going to start with the dark portions of the pattern, which is just a little tiny bit of titanium white and ultramarine. And boy, this is fun. Boy, oh boy, are we having a good time here. So I'm going to start by noticing okay, there's some shapes, just like general shapes on this coffee pot that include a little bit of dark blue. The lid has a tiny bit of dark blue, and I could get a really small brush if I wanted to and go crazy. But for the purposes of the 100-day challenge, we're not going to do that because that's not sustainable. And also, just as a heads up, this is a very long demo. You'll see that my earlier demos range from an hour to 5 minutes. So some days you have the energy and the focus, and some days you don't. Today, I am grateful that I do have the focus. Some days that's not going to be the case, and I have to be fully aware of that and be gracious to myself and just thank myself for showing up when I can. Right. I'm going to do a little bit more of this dark blue, and it also gave me an opportunity to play with this shadow. Loving it. All right, so I don't mind when a little bit of my underpainting peeks through, so typically I'll leave it, but I'm just working into this. Now I noticed something new that I haven't noticed before, and that is the little metal bolt on the side of this coffee pot. And it's very reflective because it's metal, so I'm going to go ahead and take a little white paint and make it pop. Now I noticed another highlight here, and I noticed another one on the little, oops. Now I overextended the little nozzle, so I'm just using a little bit of black to blend out my little streak. And there's a little underpainting peeking on this side, and I'm actually not going to get rid of it. I kind of like it. So the handle has a little bit of a highlight. Now moving on to the highlight on the vase. So it is like a light blue. All right, so I'm going to let that pattern go because if I keep going, it's going to cover up some of the highlights underneath it. So I don't want to take away from it too much. So I'm actually going to pop a little bit of white on the light facing side to offset some of that. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to, oh, there's a little bit of all right, I'm just gonna do a little underlining of the shadow on this side. Okay, and as much as this highlight is fun, it's making a little bit of an imbalance, so there we go. All right, I'm not gonna mess with that anymore. It is what it is. We are moving on. Okay, so now I want to take a brush and I'm gonna load up my yellow mixture for my daisy petals here. Notice how I'm reloading the brush to keep the paint fresh, otherwise it's going to bump up against the dark background and it's going to get muddy. We don't want that. There are some daisies that are in shadow, so you want to make sure that you notice the different value changes if you are painting something in the foreground versus background. All right, we're coming to the end of this painting. Now, just the final touches, final details, final expressive moments. Might need a little bit of a refresh on our paint, white paint, and then a little bit more of the yellow and a fresh paper towel. Now, this is gonna be, like I said, this is a pretty long demo, and I won't even upload this to my YouTube channel just for funsies because you guys also have tons of demos. I'm actually going to take a little bit more of my black mixture. I'm going to refresh some areas as well. I'm going to go over, separate some of these daisy petals, and even though I initially wanted to paint a little bit more variation in the fabric, I'm making an executive decision to kind of keep it more of a solid shape in the background because it just looks better to me. The variation can be more on the bottom part of the fabric. All right, so now just taking a little bit more white, titanium white, and the cad yellow. Running out of room here. You can definitely keep your palette much more clean than me, but gotta do what we gotta do. Okay, I'm just gonna load up my brush and we're gonna just squint our eyes and see where are some of the other. Keep the brush nice and loaded with fresh paint when you do this. Otherwise, it's going to create nothing but mud. Keep loading up the brush. And now we're going to do stems, a little bit of the center. What else? A little bit of pop on this highlight. A little bit of a pop on this screw. All right, it's a little bit exaggerated, but it works. And then I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and some of the dark green. Cool. Okay. I personally had a blast. I hope you guys have so much fun painting too. This is day 1 of my second 100-day challenge. Well, I did a bunch of other challenges, but yes, officially day 1 of the 100-day challenge. All right. So this took about an hour and 6 minutes, which typically is very long for me, but I was focused and you know what? And I had the time. So the truth is, like I said, I am grateful for days like today. I don't expect them often just based on my experience, but if they want to visit me, I'm not going to complain at all. So just freshening up that. Taking one final look, making sure everything looks the way that feels right to me. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed this demo. Once again, here is our still life. Here is our painting.